Welcome back, fellow Starship builders, and thank you for joining me for Chapter 11 of Walker Street Shipyards. Chapter 10 was dedicated to sealing up the secondary hull and the often problematic process of closing down the strongback and getting a nice clean fit here at the bases of the nacelle pylons, making sure that there's no gap occurring along this line here and no gap or no ridge occurring back here for the fan tail. Apparently this is an area that a lot of builders of this kit see some perspective and some best practices, because Chapter 10 got a lot of views, so thank you. I hope that some of the guidance that I provided, some of the tips that I provided for sealing this up was helpful for anyone who may be at this portion of the build. I'm very happy to be past this section of the build. Since Chapter 10, I have gone in and done a lot of puttying. You may remember that there was some bad gaps that was occurring right here, and equally on the starboard nacelle strut. So I've gone back and puttied a lot of that, puttied and sanded and puttied and sanded, and got a really good smooth finish. There is, of course, a little bit of putting and sanding that had to occur at the base of the dorsal, although it fit pretty snugly and it didn't take a lot. And a little bit of puttying along in here on this seam, a lot really back here, especially on your starboard side for your fan tail. Once I had some good puttied seamless finishes, I hand twisted the wires together and did a test lighting, mostly to see if there were any light leaks. There were a few, of course, where you expect them, like along in here. One or two along in here, they weren't bad. But what surprised me was, in addition to those few light leaks, I actually had some bad ghosting that was occurring right in here. And this was actually light glowing through the interior of the ship, coming through the styrene. I guess because, despite the fact that I had light block with multiple coats of black paint, the interior of these pieces, I just hadn't hit this area enough. Perhaps it's because I have more lights in the second build than I did on the first build, because I didn't have this problem on the first build. But I had some pretty bad ghosting occurring here, some bad ghosting occurring right back here, and a little bit on your undercarriage of the secondary hull. So I had to stop and scratch my head and think about it a little bit, how to mitigate that. And then what I did was some surgical applications in here and back here and along under here of tulip and also black spray paint. And then actually got an excellent suggestion from my fiance Eileen to try to go in and see if I could paint the interior. So I took one of these long precision cotton swabs, covered the tip with tulip, went in through the front very carefully, and was able to get the swab all the way to the back and actually paint the interior with a couple coats of tulip, letting it dry each time, and that actually went a long way in mitigating that light leak. So that was an excellent tip. Thank you, Eileen. Once all of the light leaks and the pernicious ghosting was taken care of, I went back and gave it a couple coats of the Tamiya Fine White Primer. The Tamiya Fine White Primer is really the whole coat for the majority of the hull of the ship. Then gave it a couple coats of Tamiya Pearl Gloss, and then a couple coats of Tamiya Gloss Coat, and I am very happy with the glimmer and the sheen that comes from that pearl finish and that gloss coat. Having said that, I'm going to give all of this a final coating. When there's final assembly and all the decals are in place, it's going to get a final coat of semi-gloss, because I prefer a semi-gloss finish on all of my builds, whether they're figure kits or whether they're starships or vehicles. I think that a gloss coat tends to make kits look sort of plasticky and fake. It really looks kind of cool here on this starship, but again, this is all going to get covered with Aztec decals. It's of course, and your registry markings, and that will get a final coat after all of that and all of the final assembly of Tamiya semi-gloss. I haven't removed the HDA paint masks that are here and here above the tractor beam emitters. I want to make sure that when I give this just a few more little dusts of the spray, that I don't overspray and mar or fog those tractor beam emitters. Likewise, once everything had dried, I went back and removed the paint mask over the Arboretum windows, because I wanted to make doggone sure that I did not have any overspray fogging these windows. That would be a real disaster, because if anything happened to these windows, I'm not really sure how I would be able to correct that, because there's really no way to go in and get to them, and I don't want to apply any pressure on them from the outside for fear of knocking them loose. So, very happy with the exterior of the secondary hull. And now, as promised at the end of Chapter 10, a lot of Chapter 11 is going to be dedicated to the base. The power system are going to come in through right here, so I have to drill a hole here. There's going to be two momentary switches. I haven't quite figured out where to mount them. They're probably going to be right here, that control the functions of the antenna control circuitry board. So there'll be a lot of wire that comes into here. That'll have to be some splitting off. One chunk of power is going to go to the static lighting, the windows, and the spots, and then another chunk is going to go to connect with the antenna controls circuitry board to control a lot of the automated and flashing functions. All that wiring, of course, is going to flow up through here. Some of it will be sealed, soldered, and secured here just behind the deflector dish housing, and then more power is going to come up through the dorsal and into the upper saucer when that's mounted. So next step will be to remove this lovely lady from the base and tuck it away someplace safe in some type of dry dock storage unit, and then crack into finishing or taking care of the base. Before we head down into the base and begin those assemblies, let's stop in at the rec deck for mail call and take a look at some of the aftermarket goodies that have recently come in. From HDA Model Works, I have ordered these pin stripes that go on the bulge for the bridge dome assembly right under the Shapeways upper bridge unit. These will go on the bulge for the top saucer. Like I have said before, the stock Polar Lights decals, any type of thin red line, is prone to coming apart and splitting into multiple sections. So I'm glad I have these HDA Model Works pinstripe decals. I am looking for some type of aftermarket decal for the red pinstripes that go along the top of the dorsal. I haven't found any company that are currently stocking those, so certainly anyone who knows of pinstripe decals to duplicate those, please put them into the comments. Also, I had reported in a previous chapter that Shapeways had gone out of business. I have just read, just prior to shooting Chapter 11, that apparently they are back up and running, that their website is functional. I haven't really gone in to take a look to see what type of products they have offered and whether you can go ahead and go through the process of putting things in cart and ordering them. But from several sources, I have seen that Shapeways is now up and running. So from Evans Designs, I have ordered these, which are tiny, what they call mega LED square spotlights. They are amber in color, and they will go in these sections here, 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 and here on the deflector dish housing for RCS thrusters. There are also 4 of them that I had previously ordered for around the rim of the saucer. Then, an extremely important piece, this is a 12-volt DC 2-amp electrical adapter that is going to power all of the lighting systems for the ship. I use these extensively. This is essentially the plug-in unit. It comes with an on-off switch, and then this, which plugs into your actual wire connector, and you have your positive lead and then you have your negative lead. I actually have a separate negative lead spun off of this one because I'm doing a lot of wiring tests. These are really great for powering all your lighting systems. However, the connections here and here in these wirings are somewhat fragile. On my first build, I did so many lighting tests that I had one break right here, and I had to order a whole new one. On this build, this was the power unit connector that I started with, and as you can see, it's split right here. So I will continue to use that connector for all of my lightings as long as it will stand the test of time. This one I will unseal and install directly into the base, and use a lot of caution, and also maybe shore up some of those connections with shrink tubing to make sure that everything stays firm and in place. And so now, as we said, let's get into work on the base. With the engineering and dorsal sections safely secured in a Starfleet approved dry dock, it's time to start work on preparing the base, both the internal electrical systems and power systems, as well as the paint job. The base is one of the things that I really like about this kit. It is a good solid piece and gives you a lot of leeway and a lot of capability for running wires and things. One of the first things that I will do is to drill away or saw away this little nub right here, which was probably left over from casting, and then run some holes through these bulkheads for wires. Like I said, I've got a hollow piece of steel tube that I've hit with a few coats so far of black flat paint and a coat or two of Tamiya flat black sealer. Your wiring is going to run all up through here and into the hull. So for this particular build, again, we'll be using the 12-volt 2-amp power unit that has an on-off switch and this plug, which will connect into this, which will be secured into the base, and then your power will flow through these wires. Now, like I mentioned, these wires are very fragile, And so this is a leftover piece from my first build that I had the negative leads crack off, but it is a perfect piece for using as a template and measuring. I'm going to mount it here so that the plug-in portion faces out. So I'll be drilling a hole and carving out a place to fit this in securely. Then we'll probably right here in these two portions have the momentary switches for the Tenna Controls circuitry board, and then start the wiring process of the different sections of wirings that'll flow through here and up through here through this tube. A lot of what is going to take place initially will be sectioning off two different runs of power. There will be the run specifically for the static lighting, the windows, the few of the spots, the RCS thrusters, and I'm going to go into the power, the plug-in unit, and section off right here and branch off two lines that will run and connect into the hull right behind the deflector dish that will power those systems. But then also there are several other sections. The positive lead really runs straight into the positive input on the Tenna Controls circuitry board. Your negative lead actually branches off in two different places to circle through for those momentary switches. And I'll be honest, I'm getting a little bit of anxiety and a little bit nervous about all of this. As I've said many times before, this is all new to me. Now, a few months ago, I had everything hooked up and laid out on this workbench, as was shown in a previous chapter, and had all the lights working. So I have confidence that I can actually hook everything up, but it's now it's going to be a little bit more complex, a little bit more complicated, and actually having everything secured and running through the base. But then I have to remind myself, like they say in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it's only a model, and you know, I've done it once, I should be able to do it again. Well, it was a pretty ambitious but pretty productive weekend for a lot of the work on the base and for designing and hooking up the advanced wiring system. First, I went into the base and drilled holes for my momentary switches. There's a hole here on the end where the plug-in is going to go, and then went into the bulkheads inside of the base and drilled some holes for the wires to run. They will ultimately all run up through this hollow tube and make connections behind the deflector dish in the secondary hull, and then more wires will run up ultimately and connect to the Tenna Control circuitry board, which will be in the saucer. I've got the majority of the paint coat done. I've got a little bit of fine tuning, a little bit of sanding to do, and then apply the finishing coat of the Tamiya semi-gloss. But I gave it a couple of shots of Testors flat black rattle can spray paint. Then some very fine dustings of Tamiya dull red. I was really trying to replicate that red rust color of the structure and the armatures of the dry dock that you see in the dry dock sequence of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I'm pretty happy with the color scheme, the way it all came out. Then once I got the paint the way I wanted, it was time to sit down and start a long day of identifying and running wires. So with the Tenna Controls wiring diagram as my guide, I took the plug unit of the 12 volt 2 amp adapter. There is the hot line, the positive line, and then there is the negative line. The first thing I did was took some shrink tubing and applied right here of these connectors. I've had problems with these in the past, shearing off right here and breaking. So I did a little bit of shrink tube there to hopefully bolster those and give them a little bit of support. Then, based on the needs of the wiring diagram, went in, split off one line, branched off one line from your hot, which is going to be the line that runs directly into this to power the static lighting, the windows, the RCS thrusters, and some of the spotlights. Then there's another line that runs pretty much straight into the circuitry board, the positive input of the circuitry board, but there is a branch that shears off a little bit further down this line that shears off to connect to the nacelles for the warp sequence. Then for your negative line, branched off right here, two different wires that go to the momentary switch 1, momentary switch 2, and then did another branch, again a line that is going to go into the static lighting, and then another line that goes straight into the tenant controls circuitry board negative input. This will all be replicated into the permanent plug unit that it will be applied directly and installed directly into the base. And again, I took some shrink tubing to try to strengthen these connections right here. But also, to keep all of this straight, I made a wiring guide, a color-coded wiring guide of all of these different wires, and I had a multicolored pack of shrink tubing. So I took a lot of the shrink tubing and did color coding for where the different lines are going to go. For instance, the hard yellow that you see here, both on the negative and the positive, designate that these are going to be the lines going straight to the static lighting. And after many hours of making connections into the base, I got the container out where I had stored all of the components for the tenant controls lighting system that I had put together way back last summer and included in an earlier chapter, the operation for that. I had all that put away for safekeeping, hooked it all back up, and then fired it all up for a test. And so you can see that there's a strobe light right here under the secondary hull that's running to the tenant controls. It flashes at one rate. In this reflection, you can see this is the navigation light that is right at the top of the back of the secondary hull, just above the doors for the shuttle bay. It is flashing at a different rate. And then out here is the different navigation and different strobe lights. So I've got all these lights hand twisted, or in some cases soldered. I've certainly had to solder all the resistors and powered up. There are 9 navigation lights, 4 that are your green navigation lights, your red navigation lights. These go on the top of either side of the saucer to designate whether it's starboard running lights or port running lights. Then there are a few other navigation lights that go around the rim of the saucer, and there's also, of course, that one that I just showed that is in the back of the secondary hull. Then there are 4 strobe lights. The one that is in the bottom of the secondary hull, there is one that goes on the top of the bridge dome, and 2 that go on the very tippy back end of the nacelles. Now, I realize that there is pretty much an enormous rat's nest of wiring, but once I disassemble this and it's all running through the hull, I'm going to help use some shrink tubing as wiring guides, and it'll be a little bit more compact and a little bit more orderly. I sometimes think that the natural state of wiring is jumbled. It really is funny how the way, if you get a bunch of wires together, it's just automatically going to become sort of a massive spaghetti. So with a little bit of effort, I'll be able to concentrate those lines as they run through the body of the ship. The great news, I'm happy, is the warp sequence, which is really the main thing that I wanted this build to achieve. You've got your amber light that lights up. This is behind the deflector dish at the very front of the secondary hull. Starts amber, then it gets more intense as the engines heat up, then it turns this blue, this intense blue. Again, this is behind the deflector dish with another activation of momentary switch. The impulse lights come on. There are 2 lights that will be behind the impulse engine grill that's in the very back of the saucer. There is another that sits down at the bottom underneath the impulse crystal. Then with another activation of your momentary switch, the impulse engines shut down and the chiller grills come on, indicating that the nacelles are fired up and we are in warp drive. With another activation, chiller grills go out, we're out of warp, we're back on impulse power. Then another activation and they go out, and one more, and the navigation light goes out and the ship is pretty much parked. The work on the base is almost completed. I have finished the paint job. I'm very happy with the way that the muted rust red comes out over that tester's flat black, and I went ahead just for the sake of, I wanted to see it, if nothing else, put 2 of the stock decals in place here. These replicate the really cool Art Deco-y lighting panels that is yet another testament of the excellent work that Doug Trumbull and his team did in a very short amount of time, just in designing not only the refit Enterprise, but in designing the dry dock and a lot of its components down to the smallest detail. Again, like these Art Deco inspired lighting panels. I didn't have a bit of problem with the stock decals in getting them out. They didn't split or come apart. They laid down very well with a little bit of microset. So I'm very happy, and I think this entire base is going to look fantastic when they are all in place and all of these different panel holes. Now, before I flip it over and take a final look at how the wiring components are running through the base, let's have a show of hands of any experienced 3-fit builders who may have noticed in a previous segment in this chapter, when I first powered everything up and showed the 2 different lights that were blinking on the secondary hull, I had the lights incorrect. That the light on the immediate underside, the belly of the secondary hull, was blinking, which was supposed to be a strobe light, and which I said was a strobe light, was actually blinking at the rate of a navigation light. The light that was at the very back of the secondary hull on the top, just above the bay doors of the shuttle bay was blinking at the rate of the strobe light. It's not a huge problem. It's just when I do my final connections, I'll have to make sure that those lights are wired the correct way. I just wondered if anyone noticed. Looking at the underside of the base of the 350 Refit Enterprise, these are the different wiring runs for different portions of powering the static lights as well as powering the antenna control circuitry board. Your different lines will flow ultimately into here and then up through this hollow tube that comes out through the top of the base. They will go up and come out inside the locking ring at the front of the secondary hull just behind the deflector dish. All of the static lighting will connect there at that joint just behind the deflector dish on the secondary hull. That's going to be all of the strip lights powering all the windows. That's going to be some of the spotlights at the front of the nacelles. It's going to be the RCS thrusters, one or two other things. That'll all get connected in the secondary hull. Then more power will continue to flow up through the dorsal neck and connect in the antenna control circuitry board, which will be mounted probably in the lower half of the saucer. So when I was very fortunate when I ordered my soldering iron that it came with a lot of really great accessories, including several bags with an assortment of different colored shrink tubes. And so with this many colors available and this many sizes available, I decided to help keep straight all of the different power lines. I color coded everything and made a color chart using the shrink tubing. I've got, for example, for the momentary switches are powered by the negative lead, which comes off of the 12 volt 2 amp DC power jack right here. This line right here is your negative lead. There is a green shrink tube which designates that this line switches off, branches off and goes to this, which is a momentary switch 1. There is a red line which branches off and goes to this, which is momentary switch 2. Then they feed through this hole in the bulkhead, and again you see there's green for momentary switch 1, red for momentary switch 2 will feed up through here, again through the tube, so that when they ultimately emerge at the top of the dorsal neck into the lower saucer, I will know which lead goes where and connect them into the designated portions on the antenna control board for momentary switch 1 and momentary switch 2. At the top on that board it says SW1 and SW2. Then all of the static lighting is designated by yellow. This is yellow for the negative lead, this is yellow for the positive lead, and right here again on the input jack, you can see the negative lead has yellow, which designates that this branch right here, and the positive lead is yellow, designating this branch here, and the negative lead has yellow, designating this branch. That are these two lines right here. They will again connect just behind the deflector dish to all of the static lighting. Then these lines, which are designated by black shrink tubing and come through this bulkhead, and again will feed up through the tube, and again will go all the way up through the dorsal neck, connect into the antenna controls board. These are your actual power lines coming from the input. They're designated by black shrink tubing, and your positive lead actually has a branch that's going to split off that powers the chiller grill lights. So there is a tiny little portion that I've really scraped aside in preparation for those. Again, these are going to mount directly, or going to input directly into the designated spaces on the tenant controls board for your positive and the negative. So a lot of this will be less tangled up when everything feeds up and tightens up going through this hole. Here is the input jack, which I have yet to really make the final step of gluing in place here in this hole. It will go right here. Glue into place. Now, one of the things that I did in my first build is I worried that with the constant plugging in and unplugging of the jack into this plug, that it may eventually come loose and crack out of the glue that is holding it in place and get pushed into the base. So there is an additional step that I took to ensure that it doesn't break off. I'll show what that step is once I have got this piece glued in place, and we'll show that in a future chapter. So speaking of future chapters, I think this is an excellent place to wrap up chapter 11, dedicated to the base, dedicating to figuring out a lot of these advanced wiring runs. As we get into chapter 12 of Walker Street Shipyards, that will concentrate on mounting the lower planetary sensor at the bottom of the the bottom of the lower saucer. We'll also begin the Aztec decaling on the lower saucer. Also do some Aztec decaling on the dorsal, the neck portion. Might even get as far as mounting the lower saucer onto that dorsal. Why just the lower? Good reason for that. I thought this through, and I think that I am going to mount the two saucer halves separately, starting with, of course, the lower saucer onto the dorsal. Still thinking that through. Might change my mind. We'll have to see. Anyway, look forward to seeing everyone for Chapter 12, Walker Street Shipyards.